Assalamu alaikum, peace be upon you all. This is your host, Amina Ahmed, and you're watching Muslim Network TV. Welcome back to another episode of NextGen and today's discussion of the rise of Hindutva in the United States. We're there on Galaxy 19 satellite, MuslimNetwork.tv, Amazon Fire TV, Roku, and soon on Apple TV as well. Now, previously on NextGen, we spoke about the situation of minorities in India and how minorities in India are facing discrimination, oppression, and almost these violations of human rights that we're seeing in India. Not almost, but literally these violations that we're seeing with the building of detention centers and mob lynchings in India. And today we have two strong, empowered, revolutionary brown women to discuss not only what is happening in India, but the situation in America and how this ideology translates into the United States, how the Hindutva ideology is here in the United States as well. Firstly, we have with us Shreeya Singh, who was born in Ahmedabad, India. Shreeya is a student at Yale University and is fighting against Hindutva ideology. She's the founder of Sahi and is working in Yale's Peace and Prologue Leadership Initiative and the managing editor of Yale's South Asian Society. This summer, she hopes to be working remotely for the office of Pramila Jayapal. Thank you so much, Shreeya, for being with us again. And, welcome back. You were with us before. We received so much positive feedback for the work that you do. And thank you. And one correction, you are the editor of Yale Globalist. I'm sorry about that. So thank you for being with us once again.
No, it's such a pleasure to be back here. Thank you, Amina, for having me back. I'm so excited for today's show.
And with us today, we have another young brown woman, Visha Padukapati. She's the legislative director for Sahi, a student at Yale University. She was previously the national policy co-director for Stand USA, where she worked on mass atrocity prevention. She's working for both campaigns and for elected officials, and she hopes to continue to work for progressive foreign policy. Thank you so much, Visha, for the work that you do, not only for India, but you do it for Congo, Sudan, Burma, Yemen. We see you all around. So thank you for being with us. Thank you for the work that both of you do.
Of course, yeah. Thank you so much for having us.
And Shreeya and Visha, before we go into kind of the details of the rise of Hindutva in the United States, I want to talk about what even is Hindutva for our viewers who might not be familiar with that term. Tell us about Hindutva.
Yeah, for sure. So Hindutva, at its essence, is a right-wing political ideology that to transform India's democracy into a Hindu Rashtra or Hindu nation. Basically, at its core is the belief that India is a nation only for Hindus, thereby excluding Muslims, Jains, Christians, the various religious minorities, but also lower caste and caste oppressed communities in India. It is important to make the distinction that Hindutva is distinct from Hinduism in the sense that it is a political ideology, while Hinduism is a faith practiced by billions. And the proponents of Hindutva are actually part of the RSS party, or the Rashtra Swayamsemak Sangh, which is a Hindu extremist group that has drawn inspiration from German Nazism. So we can see where this ideology comes from, and you can draw a direct line straight into Hindutva ideology, which is its own form of religious extremism.
And you talk about Hindutva and how that originated in India, but how does this translate into the United States? How is Hindutva not just limited to India?
Yeah, so Hindutva in many ways is present in a lot of various forms, right? So essentially what Shreeya said, it's a political ideology. And so how you see it manifest in the US, for example, is trying to play the congressional chicken game in terms of who can we get in power, who supports the RSS, who has funding from Hindu nationalist organizations, so that the main narrative around the religious tensions in India doesn't lean towards the minorities and doesn't lean towards protection. So in the US, a lot of it is trying to make sure that the United States stays out of what's going on in India and doesn't get itself involved. But there's a lot of pushback, and a lot of pushback happens at the grassroots level. So we're hoping with Sahi and with a lot of different organizations that kind of changes the tide of the narrative and gets the United States to a proper stance when it comes to the religious violence and sort of systemic discrimination that's going on in India. And you've seen it happen with Rohingya. You've seen it happen on a lot of different levels. In a lot of ways, the NRC and the CAA, which are basically systematic ways of erasing Muslims, you've seen this in different countries. So we're trying to get it at a stage where it hasn't escalated to that point yet.
So in what ways? Yeah, no. So in what ways is the RSS kind of backing U.S. politicians? Because you said that they're playing like this chicken game where they're trying to find who they can use and back up. But how are they, doing that? How are they backing these politicians?
Yeah, so I think what Vishwa said is absolutely true, and it operates at multiple different levels. One of the goals is just the influence of money in politics. So the existence of certain organizations that are affiliated with the RSS, which is the parent organization of the BJP, the current ruling party in India. We see those organizations operating in the United States as well. One example is the Overseas Friends of the BJP, which has funded many political candidates in the United States, also thrown campaign fundraisers for RSS and BJP affiliates back in India, so raising money here from the States that's funneled back there. So I think that influence is ongoing and has only increased over the past few decades. But other
We can hear you. Vishwa, can you hear Shreeya right now?
No, I can't, but I'll fill in and hopefully she can come back on. So yes, like what Shreeya said, a lot of times it's organizations that you may not necessarily even have heard of, right? So it's your local youth group organizations, for example, that may not may not have the tag of like Vishwa Hindu Parishad. There's one of the main RSS kind of feeders in India, and there's one in America as well. So a lot of times it's culture groups that are donating to Modi. There was a big Howdy Modi event that went on, which wasn't necessarily titled like this is pro-Hindutva, but you understand the message. So a lot of times it's getting away with it because not everyone knows what Hindutva is. Not everyone knows how certain organizations are tied to Hindutva. So a lot of it happens on the back line. And our goal is to really raise the conscience of both American Hindus as well as American Indians, NRIs, and really ensure that we're supporting a secular democracy in India and that what we're doing doesn't contribute to the religious tensions within India.
Yeah. And, what I would ask you is what is the reason for the RSS to be funding politicians here in the United States? Why not just limit it to India? Aren't they doing a good enough job in India?
Yeah. So the United States has a lot of influence, right? We have a lot of influence in foreign policy. And when the United States comes out, for example, India is really sensitive to what goes on in the US. So if a US leader comes out and says what's happening in India is religious violence and is a form of religious discrimination, that holds a lot of influence in terms of what the Modi government and the BJP is allowed to get away with. So we really do set the tone, the United States, in many contexts, and of course in India as well, for various reasons, economic, building upon our own hegemony that we've built for hundreds of years in various different places. So it really matters. For the BJP to be successful, they need people in the American government who won't turn against them. So they're very, very intimately linked. And that's something that I, as the legislative director for Sahi as well, am focused on. What tone we set through Congress and through our congressional representatives as well as our local leaders. So we have folks in like Seattle, for example, in San Francisco who've condemned the Hindutva. That makes a really big difference in terms of the leeway BJP thinks it can get away with on an international stage.
And that's why it probably made a big difference when Pramila Jayapal, Ro Khanna, and these Indian American politicians kind of came out. Was there backlash from Hindutva in India and as well as here in the United States when they spoke up?
Absolutely, particularly with Jayapal's recent resolution, so House Resolution 745, which was specifically to condemn the treatment of minorities in India, but also discussing what's happening in Kashmir. And I think what that triggered not only in India pushback, but also within the States. from donors and various Indian American groups and Hindu Pundits organizations. So all of this creates an ongoing dialogue in some ways, which is positive since it brings it to the news and it means that there's increased discourse, but is also dangerous when it means that politicians are scared of speaking up about what's happening in India because they believe they will either lose significant funding or will lose the votes of Indian American electorate.
I just realized I was muted, but we see Tulsi Gabbard and Sri Preston Kulkarni, for instance, who have documented connections to the RSS. What does that tell us about, the RSS and Hindutva here in the United States?
Yeah, so it means that we're not necessarily aware, right? And that's one of my major concerns, one of Shreeya's major concerns, and as Sahi as an organization as well. We don't really understand how the RSS funds, because their funding mechanisms are not well documented. Organizations in the United States don't declare themselves as Hindutva. It's not that simple, right? It's a lot of back wing, kind of back of the tunnel funding that goes on. So those intimate connections and that kind of private lobbying, not everyone has access to in the same way that we have access to lobbying of various different kinds, like defense contractors, for example. We have that information. Gun lobbying, we know that because it's so well documented and there's so many players in the field. Our goal, our research team, a lot of different organizations are working towards better documenting this, because we do believe that if it's raised to the Indian American conscience, that people are going to make a change. I think a lot of it is, but giving the benefit of the doubt, I don't think people really understand where their money is going to. So when they pool it, they don't realize which candidates they're pulling it to and the impact they can have on exacerbating religious violence in India. So our goal is to raise awareness, because we know a lot of Indian Americans, if they find out about exactly what's going on, they will be on our side. Like people want peace in India. So that's our goal as an organization.
100%. And I think when it comes to Tulsi Gabbard, that also exposed a very interesting dynamic when it comes to Hindutva. She, in the past and very early in her career, was embraced by pro-Modi and pro-BJP elements of the Hindu American diaspora. So saw a lot of donors, saw a lot of funding coming from those groups. But when it came time for her presidential campaign, she actually publicly distanced herself in some way from these elements by saying that she wouldn't speak at this conference that various organizations had organized called the World Hindu Conference. And that is interesting because it means that while she continued to accept the funding, there was a shift in the sense that it was less politically and publicly salient to align yourselves with those organizations. And that's hopefully the kind of changes we wish to see moving forward, that ideally, these politicians aren't glad handing with those organizations in the first place, but if they are, it at least becomes less politically salient to be able to do so, because more and more people are aware about what those connotations and what those connections actually mean.
I think that you make a really great point, Shreeya. The fact that she distanced herself, when she got on that presidential campaign level, it tells us something, right? That it's not okay at a very global level to do this. But Vishwa, you also spoke about how we need to get politicians to not only, realize that this is bad, but speak up about it. And we'll be talking about how we can get that, how we can continue to support organizations like Sahi, and more about the rise of Hindutva in the United States right after our short break. You're watching us on Galaxy 19 satellite, MuslimNetwork.tv, Amazon Fire TV, Roku, and soon on Apple TV as well. We'll be right back.
Your eyes.
Assalamu alaikum everyone, it's your brother Zain Bika from South Africa. One of the first educational programs ever produced for Muslim children was the ever popular Adam's World series. The colorful and comical Muslim puppets stole the heart of a generation. Sound Vision will be releasing brand new episodes of Adam's World with the launch of a Adam's World app. Subscribers will enjoy new Adam's World episodes as they are released, as well as all the classic episodes of Adam's World. So visit adamsworldapp.com now to learn more, subscribe and enjoy new adventures of Adam and his friends. And let's keep helping tomorrow's Muslims today. Assalamu alaikum.
It's Adam's World. Believe me, there's a lot to see. Bismillah, let's explore.
To NextGen, I'm here with Shreeya and Vishwa, two young women who are fighting for justice and freedom in India, as well as advocating against Hindutva here in the United States. Now, with presidential elections coming up, I would want to ask both of you, where do Joe Biden and Kamala Harris stand in this, right? We did see Amit Jani, who was appointed as coordinator, an outreach coordinator for Muslims. He was sidelined due to his and his family's connections to the RSS. But in general, where do Kamala Harris and Joe Biden stand in this? Are they clear in their position and stance against Hindutva?
So I think it's a little too early to tell. I think that there's a lot of good work being done to make sure that they stand on the right side. I think that the campaign did a really good job of taking the initial reactions and doing what they needed to do with internal restructuring to make sure that they were conscious and sensitive to what's going on in India. So I'll definitely give them credit for that. I don't think that Hindutva is a mainstream issue for any politician. It certainly wasn't during the Democratic primaries. I still don't think it is. It's a reluctant conversation because with just the way geopolitics works, with the rise of China, it's important for the United States to maintain ties to India. With the way Indian politics is going, the BJP looks like it has a really big stronghold for definitely for the foreseeable future. So it's a really tough conversation to have. And a lot of the work that Sahi is in is just conscious raising so that the American Indian Democrats know where they need to stand to fight for an equal India and an equitable India. And we know that the Biden campaign is sensitive to those. They've proven it before.
Yeah, and I want to talk about, the work that's being done, because you do make it clear that there is work that's being done. Tell me more about that work that is being done here in the United States to oppose Hindutva.
Yeah, for sure. So it's on several different levels, right? We have a legislative division, we have an outreach division, which Shreeya leads. So we have organizing. So we started off as a really big movement with Holi Against Hindutva, and that was really us reclaiming what the narrative meant for us in terms of India diversity and where we stand in terms of religious tolerance. We wanted it to be clear that India was being erased of its colors, and this was for us a really symbolic way of demonstrating it. And so we started there, and we've continued to organize webinars. We have over 100 student volunteers as well as participants from various parts of the world working on various different initiatives on the NRC, on the CAA, as well as conscious raising in the US, changing the narrative, research. So we are really all over the place in terms of we're everywhere, and that's where we need to be, because the fight is not one-pronged, it's 15-pronged. And so for us, it's really about identifying where we can be really useful and giving people the resources, Indian Americans the resources, as well as South Asians who are against the fight, who are against Hindutva, and equipping them with what they need and equipping them with the connections they need to make tangible change. So really getting the student voice involved and telling Congress too that there are a lot of students here who are pissed and who are ready to raise their voice and be really loud for what they want on the subcontinent.
And I think the key has also been during this work, working with existing organizations, activists, and organizers who have been doing this work for decades. So we've been really lucky to be able to stand on the shoulders of giants in the sense, not just in the States with amazing organizations like, for example, Equality Labs doing caste abolitionist work in the States, but also listening to the demands and the amazing work that's coming out of India. Of course, Hindutva and combating Hindutva in India is a very different experience because it's so much more dangerous, particularly now when activists and protesters can be jailed for any level of dissent. But I think that makes it all the more important that diasporic organizations who not only see what's happening in India, but are conscious of how that affects American politics as well, are able to step in and sort of mobilize a new generation of Indian Americans that don't really fit in with the Howdy Modi, pro-BJP sentiments of perhaps older upper caste Indian immigrant generations.
And I think we are seeing that, right, with this new generation where they are supportive of freedom, of justice. And that is what being anti-Hindutva is, to be quite frank. But you speak about a lot of the work that Sahi does, and it's truly inspirational and beautiful to see that work is being done. But how about during COVID? How have you guys been coping and managing now?
Yeah, so COVID has been our extended plan time because it's given us a lot of the time as well as the resources and just bandwidth to organize for the future. Because we know, look, domestic agenda is going to be on the table for a very long time. And we've had I'm a part of a couple different nonprofits, and we've been having this conversation as to how do you push international aid? How do you push the United States to be in that space when domestically we need to invest a lot of resources, and we're definitely tied. So we know a lot of political capital is tied to COVID and is tied to all things COVID related. So our goal now is to is to really put in that effort to mobilize a grassroots movement and get folks ready for this fight when it comes up on Congress's table, because we don't want this to take another Khashoggi, which it took for Yemen, for example. We don't want it to take the Rohingya genocide being labeled as such for Congress to take action. We want it to be now. And it doesn't have to be grandiose pieces of legislation. It can be small. Like, we know that tweets from senators get a lot of attention in India, for example. So it's every little thing. So we're focused on the little things right now. And in the long run, we're ready for the big fight.
I think it's all about using this time to build capability, but also because Sahi is such a new organization, trying to build out our network, get campus coordinators and chapters established across the country, but also use this time to sort of adapt to the new normal, because even whenever this pandemic passes, digital organizing and the ability to connect with people, not just across the states, but now in India as well, and use their guidance to continue our work, is something key that this pandemic phase has encouraged us to do and build those capabilities. And we hope to continue doing that in the long term.
Now, a lot of the work that's being done seems extremely, it seems powerful, right? Even if it's little, it seems like it's making an impact, because we were speaking about before how even those smallest things get response from the trolls. And I think that tells us that some of the work that we are doing is impactful. But the RSF is extremely powerful, has plentiful resources. So is the work that is being done actually effective?
We see that it is, right? We know that India is really sensitive to what goes on. There are news articles upon articles about Elizabeth Warren, about Pramila Jayapal, about congressional leaders who are coming out and standing against what's going on in India, and particularly the BJP government and the NRC and the CAA. So we know that India is really sensitive. It's really hard to measure. So you're right in that. The RSS has a lot of tangible resources, a lot of money, a lot of political influence, a lot of connections. And they do it more from they have a lot of like both bottom as well as like a top-down approach, but they have a lot of connections basically. And our goal is to work from a grassroots, work from a really sort of humble level in terms of trusting people to make the right decision and informing them. So a lot of our work doesn't involve, paying out congressional campaigns. We don't do that. We rely on justice. We rely on organic truth and the power behind that, and as well as the student voice. Like, that's what Sahi is about. It's raising the student conscious in the United States and making this something that's a fight that everyone wants to fight for.
And hopefully it is.
And something,
No, go ahead, Shreeya.
something that we always Thank you, Amna. Something that we've always tried to remind ourselves also is that this is an intersectional and also global struggle against fascism. And this struggle is one that is replicated in many different communities and happening across the world, not just in regards to Hindutva. It is a long game, and it isn't necessarily the end goal to, in one day, 1 week, or 1 year, eradicate the sentiments of Hindutva that we see in the States, but it is to build the basis, especially for young people, to not only be educated, but carry on that education and that dialogue within their own various circles so that we can see the trickle-down effect across society. Something that has been really motivational to us is to watch how other movements and other organizations have used various tactics, especially tactics to bring together young people to combat fascism in various different contexts.
And Shreeya, from what you say, it seems that, perhaps we won't even see change in our lifetime, but the fact that you're still fighting, perhaps for future generations, for our kids and their kids to actually see change and not to live in a world where this is an ideology that's so prevalent. But for those who also want to step in and fight against Hindutva, what is your advice to them? Where do they get started?
I think that's the nature of believing that you're fighting for the right side of history. It sometimes means that you may not see the results in the timeline that you want to see them, but you believe that it matters for the long run. And I guess I don't personally believe that I am even in a position to give other people advice, because this work is long term and we are all learning, and I've learned so much through this myself. But my one piece of advice, which was given to me and has been really influential in the way that I approach thinking about Hindutva, is that there is always so much more to learn, and there are many great resources and readings and shows and documentaries that we can all use to educate ourselves, and that education process never stops. And it's important for us to continue that process before we can hope to continue the dialogue with other people. So I think that internal process of education is really, really important.
Yeah, and Vishwa, before we end, I do want to take your advice and just to people who are watching, younger people who are watching that do want to make some change.
Yeah. So my advice is, well, first, trying to plug, but join Sahi. Like, we are a community of students, and we'd love anyone who's interested, anyone who just wants to learn even. So you don't necessarily need to commit yourself to one ideology. We're in the process with you. We know that there are people at various stages of levels of education and commitment, and whatever it is, we're here to work with you to help you better understand how you can support the subcontinent. And we're an intersectional space. We work with various different organizations, and my best piece of advice is just make sure that this is on your radar, because this is a really important fight, and a secular Indian democracy is worth fighting for, because we've seen the consequences already in parts of democratic backsliding. So the more we fight, the more our Indian brothers and sisters back home have the freedom to live in the manner they choose. And I think as part of the diaspora, you have even more responsibility, because you are removed from the immediate dangers of that situation. So feel the responsibility, join Sahi, and we're here for you.
And indeed, this is a fight that is worth fighting for. Thank you so much, Vishwa and Shreeya, for being on here today, for informing us about the rise of Hindutva in the United States, because I'm sure many were not informed of this before. So I appreciate both of you and the work that you do, and the work that Sahi does as well. And thank you to our audience for watching. And until next week, Assalamu alaikum. Peace be upon you all.